Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm Dr. Anthony Mazzella. On this channel, we go beyond labels and symptoms to explore the inner, often unconscious, emotional world behind narcissistic and related personality patterns. In these short clips from the full podcast, you'll get a clear, compassionate, psychodynamic insight into behavior. Here's a short clip from the podcast that highlights what this looks like in real life.
Welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 9, Redefining Relationships After Parental Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. Our goal is to provide information and resources to educate and empower viewers to recover from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse, so they can reclaim their happiness, health, and personal power. Our speakers specialize in supporting others through their unique expertise and offer valuable insights, tools, and inspiration to help viewers find the courage and motivation to change their lives. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Anthony Mazzella here with us today. Dr. Anthony Mazzella is a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, and host of the Narcissism Decoder podcast. He has over 20 years of experience helping individuals and couples navigate complex personality dynamics. He specializes in psychodynamic treatment with a focus on narcissistic presentations, using a deeply attuned, insight-oriented approach. In addition to his private practice, Dr. Mazzella is a faculty member and supervisor. He also is the creator and host of the Narcissism Decoder, a podcast and video channel that brings complex psychoanalytic ideas to life, making them relatable, practical, and especially relevant to understanding personality disorders and relationships. Welcome, Dr. Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me, Pi.
Oh, yeah, I'm super excited to get into our conversation today. And so my first question, addressing adults who grew up, let's say they grew up with a covert narcissistic parent. And sometimes they might think, well, nothing too terrible happened. Why am I feeling so unsettled? So
Yeah.
how do you understand covert narcissistic parenting and what makes that impact so difficult to name?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most painful and perhaps confusing parts of covert narcissism is I remember back in the day, I would say to patients when they were going home, like for the holidays, you're returning to the scene of the crime. And they got it, like they knew what I meant. But when you grow up with a covert narcissistic parent, that's not always clear. In other words, it's not uncommon that you hear from these patients, I had a wonderful upbringing. My parent, let's just say prototypical case, my mother was always there for me. She was reliable. Even today, she'll still pick up the phone if I call, right? So there was no scene of the crime. There's no bruises or explosive moments, so these are the things that go on scene, right? That's the whole word covert, but there is clearly a great deal of narcissism, but when they go on scene, that doesn't mean these things still do not get internalized. In other words, there are still consequences of growing up with this kind of parent that you bring with you into your adult life and adult relationships. And there are many, and there's so much literature out there, by the way, on covert narcissism. I won't go through all the different, because it's a whole different cluster of narcissism. So there are a lot of different ways that this presents. But one way in particular that I hope we could focus on is this deep feeling that you carry around with you, that you've done something wrong, that you feel guilty, or that you're too much of a burden, that you don't have a right to ask for certain things or assert yourself in certain ways, even as an adult, and not even with your parent, of course, with your parent, but just in life in general, I mean. So that's one way that I begin to frame it. So no obvious crime scene, but yet an incredible amount of damage that you continue to carry with you today.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because that was definitely my childhood. I always thought I had done something wrong, and I my biggest wish was to get through an entire day without my parents yelling at me, being angry or upset with me for being a child.
Yeah.
But also, the smaller I could be, the less of a burden I thought I might be for my parents. So I did a lot of like shrinking to avoid interactions where I felt a lot of contempt from my parents.
Yeah. So yours was even slightly different than what I described, is that there was actually yelling, if I heard you correctly,
Well,
right?
yes, and well, or let's just say, they made it known they were very disappointed in me.
Yes, that's okay. That's more the covert. That's right. So again, it's like they're here, but now something, they make it known that they're upset, and I feel something, but I'm
Mhm.
not quite sure because they may not necessarily be saying how disappointed they are or how upset, but it comes out again in that covert, subtle way. That's what makes it so complicated and confusing, because now you're growing up with two, like a big contradiction, which is I have a parent, they're here, they're reliable, they'll go to bat for me. But on the other hand, something feels off. And these are the people that I typically hear, like what you just described, Pi, is I stayed in my room a lot. I didn't really interact with my mother too much or with my father, right? Or, when they call today, it's hard for me to really be open and genuine with them. I keep it very superficial. I don't know what it is. I just don't trust, that I could be open with them.
Yeah. Let's talk a little more about these interactions and, not being, because certainly there were blow ups in my life, but there was also, that just that undercurrent that was going on. So
Mhm.
can you walk us through how a seemingly neutral exchange with a covertly narcissistic parent can still leave a child feeling confused, blamed, or emotionally alone?
Yeah, and I like the way you phrase that, right? Like it's because this is where it gets so tricky. I'll give like the whole the main premise here is it's in these micro moments of interaction. I don't even say moments; they're like micro moments because they go under the radar. They're so subtle, but so destructive. So I'll give like a prototypical example of this. So a patient tells me that he's getting engaged, right? And he's really excited. He met a woman that he loves, and he goes home and he tells his mother the great news that he's getting engaged, right? And this whole thing that he met this woman, except so his mother's response was, "Okay, right." So nothing obvious happens, but it's a shift, right? It's a shift in tone, right?
Mhm.
It's a shift in demeanor, in posture. Now he leaves, and this is part of the psychodynamic work, is to help him get much closer to his own subjective experience of this, right? Because this is something he would brush off, right? Like these stories sometimes are even just told in passing. And it's funny because sometimes patients will say, I remember about a year ago, you asked me about my mother, and I was like, nothing to discuss there. But then once you get closer to these like everyday micro moments, these experiences, what he ends up talking about is that he felt like he did something wrong, that he felt guilty. And guilt is something he's always carried around in his life, but we never really fully understood why. Because again, he came from such a wonderful, loving family. But here it is. The okay is not yet like inducing the guilt, but it's saying when you do something, and this is a big part of it, when you assert yourself, when there's any sense of autonomy, independence, I'm not going to affirm that. I'm not going to affirm you. So your autonomy, your whole, and if this goes on for many years, as of course it does, your sense of self, your identity, all that begins to erode. And this is, again, a subjective experience that we get much closer to by following this one moment where a mother's response is just like, okay, and that's it. Or a young woman turned to her mother. She was telling me this story. She wanted to talk about some acne. And the mother was like, oh, you get that from your father. You have your father's genes. There was a acrimonious separation many years ago. And the mother obviously carried around a lot of hard feelings about the father. So again, she felt something. She said, like, my engine started to run. She felt something, but couldn't put her finger on it. Because what did her mother really do? She just said, you have your father's genes. Simple as that. Now, if she were to call her out, it's called plausible deniability. The mother would say, no, I'm just saying you have your father's genes. Or, in the first case, I said, okay, okay, you're getting engaged. Right? Like, I didn't, there's nothing here. Oh, you're just being too sensitive. There's nothing to look at here. And
Yeah.
that's the confusing. Yeah, go ahead, please jump in because that's the confusing part.
Yeah, my mother would ask me what I was, what why am I so sensitive?
Oh, so,
What are you so upset about? I just said this or I just did that. And it's like,
mhm,
yeah, that's the point.
yes. And then if we can, it's called, remember, okay, so in psychoanalytic language, we call this mentalization, right? That means developing a capacity to think about thinking. But this is very complicated because that means you have to have the capacity to think about what's the motivation? Why would somebody say, oh, you're just so sensitive? And it's incredibly hard because you could walk away feeling like, oh, I think I am a bit sensitive. You're right. Why am I making such a big deal about this? She did say okay, or she just said it was in my father's genes. So helping somebody develop a greater capacity for mentalization to reflect on what do you think your mother meant when she said that? Why do you think she chose that? Did you notice anything, in her tone? Like, and then he'll say, yeah, it went flat. What do you think that meant? Why a flat tone at such an exciting moment in your life?
Mhm.
Right? She seemed pretty excited afterwards when she wanted to talk about the weather instead of your engagement, right? So why? And that's the hard part because like all the different clusters of narcissism, right? They'll try to make them feel guilty so that they don't do what? Separate from the family. There's still so much more to explore about this topic and related dynamics. If you're finding this discussion helpful and you want to learn more about the various facets of narcissism and related personality organizations, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video clip. If you want to do an even deeper dive, check out my podcast. I go into far more detail there. Okay, until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.